Hey everyone, we're gonna give it a minute before we start here and let folks join the program. Can see some folks have dialed in on the phone and other folks are on the Zoom. We'll just start in a minute here. My name is Mark Hefflinger. I'm the communications director for Bold Alliance, which is a network of small but mighty groups in rural states working to protect land and water. We work with grassroots local organizers fighting fossil fuel projects, protecting landowners against eminent domain abuse, and supporting clean energy solutions. I'm originally from Omaha, and tonight we are talking about Nebraska with an update for landowners and communities impacted by proposed carbon dioxide pipelines, with speakers including Attorney Brian Jorde with the Nebraska Easement Action Team and Domina Law Group in Omaha. Before I hand it over to our Nebraska Easement Action Team landowner organizer, Shelli Meyer, to lead the presentation, I'll just let folks know we'll answer any questions at the end of the speakers' updates. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window where you can type a question. Also in the chat window on the Zoom, you can type a question and we will get to them at the end of the program. There will be a recording of this presentation posted on the Nebraska Easement website tomorrow. That's neeasement.org, as well as on the Bold Nebraska YouTube channel, which you can subscribe for Pipeline Fireside webinars and other good stuff. If you're joining by phone, you have a question, I'm going to throw out Shelli's phone number. You can text it at 515-422-6136. And Shelli is with the Nebraska Easement Action Team, landowner organizer. Her family has a century farm, I think, in Dixon County. We first met when she was attending carbon pipeline meetings, I think Summit Navigator in Nebraska. When I was with Tom Genung, who is also on the line here, another landowner organizer with Bold and the Nebraska Easement Action Team, who we worked with on the Keystone XL pipeline. So with that, I'll hand it over to Shelli.
Good evening, everybody. I'm glad you're here to learn about what's happening across the Midwest with Summit Carbon. As you may know from reading my emails, we were able to have two pipelines canceled. That was Wolf in Iowa, and we have Navigator that also canceled in October of 23. So we have one more to go. We don't want to give up. We want to keep pushing. As you know, Brent Neese has showed up to many counties giving a update on what he feels is an update, but we're going to give you the full story of what's happening across the Midwest. And Brian Jorde from Domina Law is with us tonight. He's involved in many of these items across the states. He has many, many hundreds of landowners that he's helping try to fight this fight. And just remember, this is still happening. This is still going on. This has, they haven't stopped. They're still pursuing this. But, with all of this that we've done, they were supposed to be operational in 2024. So we've delayed it and delayed it and delayed it. So that makes us happy. That makes the landowners happy because we don't want our land destroyed. So for just a private company, and we also don't want to have eminent domain allowed for a private company to use. So that's the main purpose here, is that there's no reason for this. So I'll hand it over to Brian. The rest of the agenda will be, Tom will talk about local and state legislation in Nebraska. Emma Schmit, she is with us as well. Am I back?
Oh, there we go. I was going to say we'd
There
lost
we
Shelli.
go.
She's
I don't know
back.
what I'm sorry about that. I don't know what my laptop did.
We got you back. Go
And
ahead.
Emma will be talking about different states happening, and then we'll close with questions and also talk about the new Nebraska landowner guide that's out there for your use and review, and to help counties with ordinances and different resolutions. So Brian, I'll take it off to you. And Brian, you're on mute.
I just gave the greatest 10-second speech of all time. Gosh darn it. Okay. Everyone, hello. Thank you, Shelli, Mark, and all happy to be here. I would remind everyone this is a public meeting. We're going to be posting this because we've got a lot of people that couldn't make it, unfortunately, tonight, and we'll be watching it tape delayed. So just keep that in mind. Pipeline insiders could be listening in at some point. So just keep that in mind based on any comments you may or may not want to make. So I'm going to talk about the facts, and a lot of you I'll be talking to either now or in the future via recording are clients of mine, my firms in Nebraska. And so it's good to talk to you. It's, time for an overview, and Nebraska hasn't been neglected. It's just because Nebraska doesn't have a public state agency, the Public Service Commission. No law has passed that gives that entity jurisdiction to say yes or no, or to route or not route a hazardous CO2 pipeline. That may be good, that may be bad, I don't know, but it's a loophole in the law. And because of that, Summit has been laying real low. Early on, 3.5 years ago, there was some saber rattling and some, they brought in the typical people from Louisiana, Oklahoma, and elsewhere that don't care about you and are going to be here for a short time and are told to do whatever it takes to get easements. And they were talking about eminent domain. Those conversations were had. People are getting upset. And Summit intelligently backed off on that. At least those threats haven't been circulating back to me via all of you and others. And probably because our laws are a little questionable on that front, which I'll get to in a second. But a good grounding point is just looking at the map, whether you're completely and totally against this, no matter what, whether you think it's a dumb route and don't like the route proposed across you or near you and your family, wherever you are on the spectrum of disdain or disbelief for this proposed hazardous project, all roads for this business plan lead to North Dakota. And to get from Nebraska to North Dakota, where this will be monetized, according to everything they've said in the last 3.5 years, and now they're pivoting, which we'll also talk about, was for permanent sequestration. So taking, according to them, this bad carbon, piping it underground thousands of miles and sticking it in the holes in North Dakota and hoping it just stays there, even though there's no one monitoring that. But I digress. So if you're in Nebraska, in order to be a part of this unwillingly and have CO2 transported across under through your land to North Dakota, it has to first go into Iowa, and then it has to connect up in Iowa, and then it has to flow through the entire state of South Dakota, and then about half or a third of the state of North Dakota. So victories in Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota, any one or all of those to varying degrees are victories for Nebraska if you're in the no thank you camp. I mean, I don't want it. I mean, I didn't come asking for this. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We're talking about 45Q tax credits. We're all paying for this. So you're paying for someone to come in some cases, abuse and mistreat you by the way they do with their land agents, and then unwillingly host a hazardous pipeline that's never been constructed at this scale anywhere on planet Earth forever, or 99 years, or however long Summit cares to do it, or the people they'll sell it to, which they will in 7 or so years after it's constructed, if it is. They're a deal company, okay, designed to be flipped to get their investors' internal rate of return. So Emma's going to get into some of the things going on in Iowa. I'll spend some time just updating you on South Dakota. There's a lot going on, right? So state agency approvals are necessary in North Dakota, Minnesota, South Dakota, and Iowa. Iowa, the fix has always been in. We were never thought that we're going to win in Iowa. Of course, you got to try. If you don't try, hey, you never know. Lightning can strike. But to our non-surprise, June 24th or 25th last year, the IUC, Iowa Utility Commission, their state regulatory body, granted a portion of the route you see here. Summit has since applied for 14 or 15 dockets Emma will touch on, that are also seen here that they do not have permission for. Then in Minnesota, they've got 2 routes. They've been granted approval for 28 miles. Now in their marketing materials, they say we've been approved. Our route's been approved. Well, yeah, 28 miles up here in Otter Tail County that then bumps into North Dakota. So this larger portion hasn't been approved yet. And then South Dakota, none of what you see in South Dakota has been approved. In South Dakota last year, we beat Navigator and we beat Summit. And surprise, shocker, Summit is coming back and they've scooped up some of the Navigator ethanol plants. Right now, we have legislation or bills, I should say, advancing through South Dakota that are trying to level the playing field in one main way, which is no eminent domain for CO2 pipelines, period. We tried variations of that in 2023 and got our teeth kicked in. Same thing in 2024. And after the 2024 session, enough is enough. And South Dakotans replaced 12 out of 14 representative senators who were up and replaced them with more friendly folks, including a couple of my clients who just, got off the tractor and enough is enough. And now they're state senators. So we've got a fighting chance on the no eminent domain for CO2 pipelines. Doesn't mean they can't build it. Go ahead, build it. Just do it by being respectful and doing it in locations where people actually want to host your hazardous pipeline. If it's so great, so wonderful, certainly in the gigantic state of South Dakota via landmass, you can find a route. So go forth and do that and stop bullying us and crying and whining that you can't have everything you want. So that legislation is ongoing. That's an all-day effort for me because there's lots of behind the scenes. Our goal is to get that bill to the governor, the new governor's desk. He desperately doesn't want it there because, he's a pro-Summit guy, but doesn't want to be shown as that, wants to act like he's landowner friendly and talk about a bill he helped pass years ago, which didn't really do much, frankly. And so we've got a big showdown there. But again, why do we care about South Dakota? Well, if there are South Dakota positive benefits to put more power in the hands of landowners, giving them the choice to say no, thank you, then Summit is going to have to rethink this poorly thought out route, and that could affect Nebraska, could affect other places. So I'm happy to get into whatever the weeds we want to on South Dakota. There's a lot to cover there. The take 2 on the Public Utility Commission hearing hasn't, it's started, but the evidentiary hearing won't start until August 13th. So we're going to be firing up for all of that and witnesses and testimony. We broke our last 2 records from the last Summit Navigator with the most participation in the history of South Dakota, over 500 intervening parties. And so we've got possible victory at the South Dakota Public Utility Commission, possible common sense eminent domain laws, which would at least infuse some rational behavior into this, which would make Summit maybe go back to the drawing board temporarily at least. So we've got a couple irons in the fire there that could affect every Nebraska landowner affected or persons who care. Over in Iowa, like I said, the IUC passed it. That is now on appeal. The appeal is just getting underway. We're fighting now over what the briefing schedule should be. In North Dakota, same thing there. We've got an appeal underway there. Remember, we initially won in North Dakota, then there was so much political pressure. It was frankly rubber stamped the second time through. And for the one ethanol plant in North Dakota that's participating, they want to conduct or build all of this route. It's kind of a little wild, but that's also on appeal. So when Summit sends out propaganda, it's a done deal. It's only a matter of time. Just stop wasting your time. Well, they were saying that 3 years ago. They've been wrong every day up until today. And there's good reason to think that this is long from over. So that's the map. It's kind of like Battleship, right? If we have to get from A to B and or I should say A to C, and we've got B in the middle here, need to be paying attention to what's going on with B, and that being South Dakota. Let me take it back to Nebraska specific things for a moment, because I just want to, it's good to kind of get back to the basics. So this is our eminent domain law, Nebraska revised statute. That's what we call our man, woman, legislative made law. Courts are what we call common law when a court makes something. And here we have our statutory law, and it's 57, chapter 57-1101. And the title, acquisition of property by eminent domain. So who is authorized and what's the procedure? Well, any person, which person means company, etc., transporting or conveying what? Crude oil, petroleum, gases, ambiguous, or other products thereof, ambiguous, in interstate, so state to state, through the state, or at least connecting two states' commerce, through or across Nebraska, who desires or requires is, put that in quotes because none of this is necessary. So it's really more who desires a right of way. That's what they call the easement, the 50-foot path. They call that a right of way, ROW, right of way, or the easement, or other interest in real estate, because they could take your whole farm if they wanted to, and being unable to agree with the owner or the lessee. Good to pause there. If you are a tenant, or if you have tenants, your tenants have legal interests in the land that would have to be condemned if there's a condemnation hearing. It's not just all about the owner. So anyone with legal title to the ground, either you're holding the deed or you have a leasehold interest, whether oral, typically that's just for 1 year, or a written lease, which can be for a year or more, you have a legal interest. So if they can't get an agreement with you folks, then this company shall have the right to acquire the same, meaning the right of way or other interest in your property, for such purpose, and the such purpose has to be one of these four things, which I'll get back to, through the exercise and power of eminent domain. Now, what is missing from the threshold of who can use? Well, the words carbon, the words dioxide, the words supercritical. So it's not crude oil. Now we're down to 3. It's not petroleum. Now we're down to 2. It's not an other product thereof, because CO2 isn't a product of crude oil, petroleum, or gases. So it comes down to gases. If you listen to Summit's experts, they are not transporting CO2 in a gas state. Remember, liquid, solid, gas. They are transporting in a very fancy supercritical state, which is living somewhere between a gas and a liquid. It's neither. It's got properties of both, but it's neither. So what is the point of all this? The point is, if Summit, and I told their lawyers this early on, and then they kind of shut up, but if they would have gotten aggressive and started filing condemnation out of the gate, what I told them is, you go ahead and do that. You'll be tied up for the next 2-3 years in litigation over, is what you're transporting a gas or not? And that was the last I heard of any threats. Could have stopped because of 1,000 other reasons and had nothing to do with that conversation, but that's what occurred. So that is the question. Do they have eminent domain in Nebraska? I don't know. It doesn't say carbon dioxide. There's an argument they don't have it. It's at least could be fought if it gets to that point. So I just want everyone to be educated on that. If they're saying we're just going to take it, or all that nonsense anyway. It's like, show me in the law where it says carbon dioxide pipelines are vested with the right of eminent domain. It doesn't. Now, why is this all important? Well, these are for eminent domain, which means you can't use eminent domain unless you are also what? A condemnor. Eminent domain is the power. Condemnation is the act of exercising eminent domain. So a condemnor is one who files a condemnation lawsuit, which is premised upon their claim they have the power of what? Eminent domain. So now we get to surveys, a little brush up on the surveys. Again, you can look these up, Google them, 76702. This is what it says. Who can enter upon land and conduct a survey or examination? Well, a condemnor. Well, you're not a condemnor unless you're a person engaging in one of these activities for gases. essentially. And so if they don't have the power of eminent domain, they certainly don't have the power to survey against your will. Very important. And again, doesn't say CO2 pipeline, it says condom nor. Then you cross-reference back, well, are you even a condom nor? I don't know. And so that's why you do not have to say yes, in my view, to a survey. You do not have to ask or allow them to be on your property, et cetera, and so forth. So again, a good refresher there. A lot of misinformation. This all comes back to black and white letter laws. You can look up, and here it is. It could be interpreted 100 different ways. We had a successful lawsuit, well, 110 of them in South Dakota on the survey statute, where the Supreme Court there found that they did not prove, Summit failed to prove they were a common carrier, failed to prove the carbon dioxide in their business scheme is in fact a commodity. Tried a similar case in Iowa with worse facts, didn't go so well. But that's, it just kind of depends on who the decision maker is and the fact finder. And there's a lot of politics in this. So I could go on and on all evening. It's probably better to maybe wait till the end for questions, but it's not over. Again, if you're not hearing from me, like, why isn't he sending us updates? Well, be happy that you're not getting harassed and have daily expensive fights or annual fights like they have in South Dakota and Iowa. In South Dakota, I already have had over 110 condemnation fights that we had to get dismissed, survey actions. We have ongoing survey litigation over if they're a common carrier or not, been to the Supreme Court and back, been, through 5 weeks of hearings in the PUC, 8 weeks in Iowa. So if you're not hearing from me, it's a good thing. Okay. And I'll only be, chiming in and getting online with you folks and sending updates if there's something like critical happening. So with that, Shelli.
Thank you, Brian. Good reminders of those 2 items as well. Really appreciate that. Let's go further with Tom and discuss, what you could be doing locally or with the state government. So go ahead, Tom. Tell us what we should do and what we should know.
Well, thanks, Shelli and Brian. What a great presentation. Thank you so much. You covered a lot of stuff there, and so that lightens the load for me, because a lot of the things that I think about, you've taken care of in a very formal way, and yet at the same time, I'm in the position of being an aid to landowners. If you have a desire to have conversation with the powers that be, I always say, call me anytime, and I'll be glad to talk to you about the details of how to go about doing this thing. The going about doing these things, though, is it's best handled by local people talking to the local authorities. So if we're talking about county commissioners or supervisors, that kind of thing, then the immediate landowners from that county should be, letting those supervisors know what their concerns are. And I'm coming from the idea that people a lot of times are opposed to having any kind of pipeline or any kind of disturbance or any kind of right-of-way taken for an easement. And so that's where I come from. And I like to make myself available on a one-to-one basis. So like I always say, call me anytime and we'll talk about the details. I've coached many times landowners that want to go. They've never been to done a presentation or made their thoughts or desires be known by any of these officials, and it's not that scary, other than most of us don't really like the idea of public speaking and going before a board and having, who said that I was going to sign up for this kind of thing? This has been an imposition that's been imposed upon us when it's talked about a pipeline company that wants to go across a landowner's ground. And so, like I'm trying to communicate here, if you have some concerns, find out who else has concerns. If you've found yourself in a position where you've agreed to something or signed an easement and that sort of thing, one of the things that a lot of time is in there is that the non-disclosure agreement, or my mother-in-law referred to it as a gag order. And so people are intimidated with the idea and intimidated by these companies like Mr. Nice and that sort of thing that has all of the fancy lingo and all that kind of thing. You don't have to have the fancy lingo. You need to be willing to go and speak and state your case. It's okay to have a couple three details as far as facts are concerned. You don't need to necessarily avoid that, but your personal story is just as important, and a lot of times more important than trying to keep up with the professional. And the professional is Mr. Nice with his PowerPoint and all of the answers and guarantees that the county is going to have all kinds of benefits from an economic development standpoint, and all these jobs and all these kinds of things, which is basically some of it is true and a lot of it is smoke and mirrors and rhetoric to make the sale. And so you're confronted a lot of times with a land acquisition person that's usually some sort of like a realtor or that kind of thing, that is telling you all kinds of stuff about all the rest of the neighbors have already signed, and so you're the last one, which may or may not be true. And so once again, I would advocate for landowners to get a hold of Shelli or me, and we'll talk you through the various details. One of the things that does exist is the landowner's guide, and I think that it's newly revised, and Shelli can let us know, just exactly the availability on that, because she's got that information. But that landowner's guide probably gives some details about the how to go and speak to these groups, whether it be your zoning board at the county level, or like I said, the county supervisors. And then if you want to let people know at the legislative level, the same kind of details are best covered by those affected. Shelli and I, and we can have Emma and anybody else come in. A lot of times we've had the privilege of working with Brian over the years, and been at hearings and those kinds of things, whether it be at the legislative level or zoning boards, those kinds of things. And yet at the same time, it's the local folks that need to go ahead and feel like you can take the lead. As soon as you've been approached for an easement, you suddenly are an expert in the area of being concerned about you taking care of your land and your property, because that land acquisition person, the land agent, has one purpose, and that's to get it. They may talk awfully nice to you, and they may say that they want to be good neighbors. Well, what they really, really want is that easement, and they're going to go to any length to try to get you talked into that. But I guess lately, last month, Shelli and I did have the opportunity to attend a legislative lobby day at the Nebraska State Legislature that was hosted not only by Bold, Nebraska, but Sierra Club and Interfaith Power and Light. And so we have the details of some of the tips to go along with talking to your state legislature that I'm not going to try to go through at this point in time, because all of that can be dealt with. Once again, I'm available pretty much anytime to do a one-on-one is just over the phone, and maybe come out to go with you to the county board, that kind of thing. But I'll just stop right there and wait to see if there's any other questions. And Shelli may prompt me to go into something else that maybe I've neglected to mention at this point in time, but I think I've taken up enough time and babbled on long enough. But like I said, I like to be available to people, so call me anytime.
Thank you, Tom. We put the information on the Landowner's Guide link and my number and Tom's number in the chat. Mark just placed it in there. Thank you, Mark. If we could hear from Emma on updates in Iowa and a few other areas, that would be helpful so we know what the current status is.
Sure. So I know Jorde kind of hit on a lot of this, but in general, I would say that things are looking pretty good for us across the footprint of the Summit pipeline, right? Like we mentioned, this was a project that was supposed to be in the ground, up and running last year. And here we are still today fighting it every step of the way. So for me, that gives me a lot of hope, and it makes me think that we're doing pretty darn good. On top of that, we are right now in the middle of multiple legislative sessions. So we are seeing quite a number of bills that could change the course of things, as well as some legislation that has, of course, been introduced by the industry that we don't love to see, and some legislation that has already failed that we did like. But I figured I'd kind of give you just a bit of an idea of what's been taking place in some of these other states, as well as Nebraska, as far as legislation goes, because it's helpful so you can either like prepare for what the industry might try to introduce in your state next, or just because it kind of gives you a good idea for legislation that you might want to introduce. So with that, I know Brian talked a little bit about South Dakota, but it is not the only Dakota that has been active as far as legislation goes. So North Dakota has seen a multitude of bills introduced around this subject. Unfortunately, we did see, I want to say last Friday, that most of them had been dismissed. They all failed, but I don't think that's necessarily a terrible thing. Well, I mean, it would have been better had they passed, right? But we knew that, North Dakota is kind of like a guinea pig for the industry. So they see all sorts of like just terrible action from the industry. And it's not really uncommon for bills to have to be introduced multiple years in a row before they actually gain traction. So it really doesn't surprise me or honestly dishearten me that much that these bills did not pass, just because we knew going in that we had a lot of work in front of us, and the fact that we were even as successful as we were in a state that's dominated by, billionaires like Harold Hamm, who is the man behind the Summit pipeline, just shows that, if we keep on fighting, we can win. So with that, some of the content of these bills that we saw come through North Dakota, we did see that they covered a variety of different issues. So I would say that for me, one of the more, like it's an okay bill, but it's not my favorite thing, were actually kind of two similar bills. There's one that a bill, House Bill 1292, that attempted to remove common carrier status for carbon pipelines, which is, could be helpful, could be good, but it's a hard issue to message around, I think. There was also a slightly more robust version of that bill that was introduced that would have banned the use of eminent domain for carbon dioxide pipelines and also revoked common carrier status for carbon pipelines. So kind of like that one, but maybe we'll see it introduced again someday. There's also a bill that would have created a fee on carbon dioxide transportation, and that money earned from that fee would have been put into a disaster fund. There was also a bill that would have eliminated tax exemptions for carbon pipelines, which would have been great to see, just because, like I said, the industry has definitely got its claws in North Dakota. So things like tax exemptions for carbon pipelines, not great up there. And the last two bills, one was it basically would hold carbon dioxide companies liable for any damages that like take place within, I want to say 25 miles if a pipeline were to leak or rupture. And then there's also a bill that would place a 2-year moratorium on direct air capture of carbon dioxide in the state. So all really good ideas, but unfortunately, we're going to have to keep fighting. If we move over to Minnesota, we've actually only seen one like particularly bad bill that we aren't too happy with. So that's good that's good news. It could be much, much worse. So we'll take it. And that bill is House File 250, and it was just introduced last week, maybe late the week before. And it was referred to the Energy, Finance, and Policy Committee. So kind of got to wait to see what happens. But the bill itself, it just establishes that it's the policy of the state to support the development and deployment of carbon capture and sequestration technologies in Minnesota. So not great, but it wouldn't, have an immediate consequence like some of these bills. It just wouldn't be great down the line to run into that. So we'll see. We'll see where that goes. Then if we go to Iowa, I tell you what, they're busy. Iowans are very busy because there are a billion different bills, and I'm not even going to try and confuse you by listing just the jumble of bill numbers or anything like that. So if you want any particular bill numbers, happy to share them, but I'm just kind of going to describe the content of some of these bills. So kind of the key legislation being pushed would ban the use of eminent domain on land that's zoned as agricultural. Obviously, this would be just a, teensy tiny little problem for Summit because they, as of right now, need to condemn over 840 parcels of ag land for their base project. So that's just for their originally proposed pipeline. Now they have extended that proposal, and they have about 300 miles of proposed pipeline that has not been permitted. So that's not even included in what they currently need eminent domain over. So that 840 parcels that they'd have to use eminent domain on, I imagine would easily exceed, 1,000 parcels by the end of it. So we will see what happens there if it's able to succeed. It was referred to the Senate subcommittee late January. And honestly, it's not the best subcommittee members, but they also aren't the worst. So we'll see how it all turns out. Another bill related to common carrier was introduced, kind of like in North Dakota. It just changed the definition, so it's not applicable to carbon pipelines. There's legislation to appeal Iowa's survey law, which Iowa's law currently allows pipeline companies to survey your land without permission, just as long as they send you a notice letter. So it'd be great to get rid of that law. There's also a pretty lengthy bill that would allow counties to enact more stringent setbacks and safety regulations. It would require that the company disclose who their investors are, which I love. They'd also the company would have to be granted permission by the landowner to engage in any sort of easement negotiations. And even in that case, contact would be limited to 2 communications per month. That same bill would also repeal Iowa's pipeline survey law. And there's a few other things in there. So it is quite extensive, but it was referred to a subcommittee in the Senate back on January 27th. And unfortunately, a former Summit employee is the chair of that subcommittee. So that does tell you kind of how far the bill is likely to move, but it's still a good bill regardless. Both chambers also have legislation on increasing the insurance requirements that have to be obtained before receiving a permit for a hazardous liquid pipeline. And the House subcommittee actually just met on that bill this morning, so I haven't actually heard what the outcome was. And on the note of subcommittee meetings, tomorrow morning, a House subcommittee is meeting to discuss a bill that would stop the Iowa Utilities Commission from sanctioning parties participating in the permit process. That was a mouthful. Basically, this is an issue that arose after the Iowa Utilities Commission threatened to charge landowners for the expenses that are incurred if they filed on the incorrect docket, because we currently have, 15 separate dockets for the Summit Pipeline in Iowa. So if they filed on the wrong one on accident, or they filed anything that the commission decided to be frivolous, they could be sent the bill, which is just not great. So we'll see if that bill winds up making any headway. And there's also a bill that would only allow a permit to be granted on a carbon pipeline for 25 years, which would potentially limit the profitability of the project and maybe make them think twice about pursuing it. There's another bill that would remove the requirement that is currently in place that says we have to post a bond to cover the company's losses if we want construction to be paused while our cases move through the court system. So the House subcommittee actually just recommended that bill be passed. So we're just waiting on the full committee to take action. And if that, keeps on moving, it'd be a godsend. And then finally, there's also a bill kind of similar to what was introduced in North Dakota around creating a disaster fund and holding carbon dioxide pipeline companies liable for damages that take place within that certain radius if a pipeline leak or rupture occurs. So good stuff, a lot going on, right? Iowa does also have a few bad bills related to amalgamation and incentivizing the build out of carbon capture infrastructure. And they both had subcommittees in the last 2 days, I want to say. But honestly, the good far outweighs the bad. So I'm feeling pretty good about it all. As far as Nebraska goes, unfortunately, you all do already have some not great laws for carbon dioxide on the books, but there is legislation around appropriating funding to the Carbon Dioxide Storage Facility Administrative Fund, which, I mean, that's kind of to be expected, nothing groundbreaking. There's also LB 468, which addresses carbon capture at data centers. And to be just entirely forthright, honest, all that good stuff, I'm not fully up to speed on what the impacts of that bill would be. So give me some time if you're curious and I'll try and figure it out, but it is currently sitting in the Revenue Committee. And then last but not least is LB 8, which is related to sustainable aviation fuel. And as we know, sustainable aviation fuel often involves carbon capture. This bill would then change the tax credits that are available to the corporations that are creating sustainable aviation fuel. It changes how long those taxes can be claimed, all sorts of stuff. It basically, at the end of the day, just incentivizes the industry and incentivizes the further development of carbon capture and carbon pipelines. That bill was referred to the Revenue Committee, and there was a hearing on it back on January 22nd. And of course, the industry did show up in support. There wasn't any real pushback, unfortunately, so we'll see if it moves, but it is not a bad idea at all to write to your legislators in opposition to LB 8. Not a bad idea to be, sending letters to the editor or just reaching out and talking to people about the bill, because it really isn't great for Nebraska or great for the, odds of stopping the Summit pipeline. So anything you can do around that, highly encouraged. But really, to wrap it all up, there's a whole heck of a lot going on right now, which is exactly what we want to see, right? We're working hard to see the good bills pass and the bad bills fail. And every conversation that we have about this issue is progress, right? So regardless of where each bill ultimately winds up, I'd say we're on the right track, but we always need more help, more hands on deck. So anything you can do to pitch in, always welcome. And with that, I'll pass it back to Shelli.
Thanks, Emma. Yes, it is important to note that each year there are more bills, there is more discussion, which is causing these bills to happen when you probably didn't see that 4 years ago. So this has really started to get people talking, and people are calling their legislatures, they're calling their senators, their congressmen, they are doing those things. People are writing letters to the editor saying, I'm not going to give up my land, for this corporation, things like that. There are examples in the landowner guide of letters to the editor that have been well written. So take a look at that. The link is in the chat. And also, I'll be sending out an email with the webinar link, along with all the information that we've given tonight on the phone numbers and the link to the landowner's guide. I don't see any Mark, do you have any questions in the chat? I don't see any that I can check on here. There's a contact list for the senators, so that is always good. You might want to talk to them about other issues going on, possibly, like everybody being fired in the country, but you may want to just call them. I know that I believe Ricketts said that his phone bank was full, and so that's a good thing. I mean, people are talking, people are calling, people are showing their concerns. Some will always say that there's a minority group out there opposing the pipeline. Well, if we were so, small, then you may not, you probably would have been in the ground by now, but you're not even started. So many things that Mr. Jorde talked about that are holding everything up. And hopefully their investors are not happy spending a ton of money on attorney fees instead of putting that pipe in the ground. So that's a good thing. So please keep up the fight, and please continue to contact, people around you, tell your family, tell your friends, tell everybody that, you don't want your ground ripped up for no reason. So, Mark, is there any other questions that might have come up that I missed?
There is one that I thought would be helpful to answer, and that's just around, Jorde talked a little bit about how South Dakota is really kind of a linchpin in all of this and what we can do to be helping some of what's going on in other states.
Yes, I mean, the Public Utility Commission, they have an online comment process. I had clients from North Dakota and Iowa try to intervene, and the PUC in South Dakota said they didn't have a direct interest, which kind of hard to believe, because what I didn't mention is the Iowa permit is contingent on Summit getting state approvals in the other states in the footprint. So they again want to brag about, we got it. Well, South Dakota is the linchpin as it relates to Nebraska due to geography, as it relates to Iowa due to the IUC's order, which again says you cannot build inch one in Iowa until you have the permits everywhere else. So it is a big deal. And you can send in comments. You can say why what happens in South Dakota does affect you in Nebraska. And you can send in all the reasons why you're opposed or the causes for concern. We will get that to Shelli and she can email it around. I'm gonna put together like a 5-step how-to. Those things matter. Because at the end of the day, we can be working on this, but if you all don't care, and I'm not saying you don't care, but if you don't care, then why should we care? Then what are we doing here? So it comes back to you. You've got to be noisy. You've got to be out there. You've got to be talking at the coffee shops. And the way these battles are lost is you all kind of just get pooped out and we just move on. And isn't this over yet? And then surprise, boom, they're digging up in next year living room. So it's up to you. So, I mean, if there's a call to action, it's get fired up, keep talking. The reason it's quiet in Nebraska is because Summit is subversively trying to get this done and not, being the British marching hand in hand in red coats and drums announcing where they're going. So that's the only reason that it's quiet, not because you shouldn't be concerned. And Tom mentioned, county level ordinances. Do you live in a county or have loved ones where maybe this isn't proposed or it is and there's no ordinance? Having ordinances in South Dakota is a huge deal. If we can beat Summit's attempt to preempt, supersede, and discard 6 county ordinances, which by the way didn't exist until we got people like you fired up, got them written, got them passed after meeting, like Shelli and Tom have gone to kind of, hey, do something already, then we wouldn't have that piece of the puzzle out there. So letters to the editor, talking in your communities, posting on social media, sharing things, keeping the conversation alive, going to the county board of supervisors, commissioners meetings, etc. There's open comment period where you can stand up. I mean, democracy is a muscle, and if you don't exercise it, it atrophies and it's no good to anybody. And if you don't care, then it doesn't care about you. So if there's a call to action, it's just stay involved. This is far, far from over.
Brian, another question that came up was, if someone has already signed an easement, can you get out of it?
So any contract that you sign can be broken. It's difficult depending upon the varying degrees. It's called an action for rescission. Rescission, if proven, would mean we put the parties back to where they were as if this never happened, which means if you accepted money for the easement under Nebraska law, you would have to pay that money back. So you get no more easement. Your title's now clean from a intrusion of the pipeline and the restrictions that the easement puts on you forever or 99 years, etc. You pay the money back. Now, you don't just get to go and buyer's remorse, right? Because we're adults here. We're expected to understand what we were doing. I get it. I'm not, talking down to anyone because there's high pressure. They tell this, things that aren't true. Some people call those lies. And your neighbor signed, everybody signed, what's the problem? And they pressure people. So in order to have a successful case for rescission, you would have to prove some type of fraud, deception, misrepresentation, which quickly is, if I know what I'm about to tell you, or part of what I'm about to tell you is not true. So I'm going to tell you something I know is not true. And I believe that you will rely on that lie in making your decision. And then in fact, you do rely on it and make your decision and give me an easement. I have just committed misrepresentation, an act of fraud upon you, and that there's a judicial remedy to rescind. So the summary is, it depends on your circumstances. If you kind of knew and understood it and thought about it and just kind of gave in, you're going to have to get real creative with what the misrepresentation fact is. If they said all your neighbors have signed and you thought, oh, really? Well, I better sign. And then you call your neighbor and they say, well, I never signed. Now we're getting somewhere. So it's a degree. The worse the misrepresentation you were told and can prove, the better the case.
Thank you. Tom, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, just to go along with what Brian was saying there, and as far as the pressure that these companies want to put on individuals, one of the things that I mentioned, the non-disclosure idea. So when Brian said, well, you go to this thing and you hear this this deal that all the rest of the neighbors have signed, and you call your neighbor. Well, you're not going to call your neighbor because you've already been threatened with the idea of a non-disclosure agreement. And so what these companies, and I want to make this perfectly clear, is they don't want neighbors talking to neighbors. They don't want to run the risk that 3 or 4 people from that county are going to be at every meeting letting their wishes be known and the resistance to this deal. And so it does take a little bit of diligence. It does take a little bit of grassroots, if you will, organizing to say, okay, well, we're gonna get the 3 of us together again at that meeting next month, and we're gonna show the county board that we're standing together and that we're really opposed to this deal. And it takes that kind of effort, and that's what really works in these deals. Shelli and I can come out and contradict, or have an update that says, well, Mr. Neese may be exaggerated here or there, and would try to be polite about it, which we should do. And yet at the same time, it's the affected people that have the most sway with the decision makers at those levels, at the county level and those kinds of places, along with the state legislature and that kind of thing. I'll stop right there.
Thank you, Tom. Another point I wanted to come across before we run out of time, and that is the PHMSA rules, the draft that came out a couple of weeks ago. We did conduct a webinar on that with Paul Blackburn and Pipeline Safety Trust, and those were in the draft mode. They were never supplied to the Federal Register. Can you give a status of those? Maybe Emma or Brian.
I was waiting for Jorde to do it, but I can certainly do it. Basically, where we're at right now is the draft rules have been taken down from PHMSA's website. And so that basically would signal that things are probably on an indefinite pause. Things are probably not going to be moving forward at the current moment. So that is not the best news in the world by far, but I think, there's still copies of the rules floating around, and looking over them, using them to inform, your county ordinances, things like that. Certainly still something we could recommend.
Thank you.
Billy, before we go, could I just have a second to address something?
Yes.
I want to show you all something real quick. And I don't care what, part of the political spectrum you're on, it doesn't matter. And as a lawyer, I use facts and arguments as persuasion, as tools to try to get where my clients want to go. Our opponents have been saying Trump pro-energy, build pipelines, blah, 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 blah. Now, he hasn't come out and taken a stance directly on CO2 pipelines. He could, and then it's like for our Trump people, it's like, well, okay, you've spoken, etc. But let's use what he has done in our favor. And I want to quickly run through this. So first day in office, Trump revoked is actually what happened, revoked 2 of Biden's executive orders, 14008 and 14082. Now, what were those orders? Well, one was setting the policy of the former administration of tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. And the other was what we know about implementation of the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. So by revoking those acts, what now has the Trump administration done? And I'm just going to blast through these. Prior policy was that the United States needs to respond to the climate crisis, and that will require significant reductions, greenhouse gases, net zero global emissions. This policy basis is now revoked and not applicable. Number 2, the U.S. was on a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. No longer true. No longer the purpose of any executive action. Carbon is found 11 times here in the orders that are now revoked. So we are no longer in this country building resilience against the impacts of climate change and promoting the flow of capital towards climate aligned investments and away from high carbon investments. So we're no longer promoting investment in Summit Carbon Pipeline and those things that are allegedly, according to their state applications they filed and their CEOs or COO under oath, climate aligned investments. So we no longer care about that. So what are we doing? And it goes on. It's no longer a policy that America's farmers, ranchers, etc., play an important role in combating climate crisis, reducing greenhouse gases by sequestering carbon. No longer a policy. Who cares about sequestering carbon? Okay, you see where I'm going with this. Coastal communities don't need to worry about sequestering carbon, no longer applicable. Increase carbon sequestration in the agricultural sector to address changing climate, no longer required, revoked, not applicable. Then we go to the Inflation Reduction Act. Efforts of farmers, tribes, ranchers, etc., to result in measurable, verifiable carbon reductions and sequestration. No longer applicable. All right, I'm going on. Driving progress towards climate change goals 2035, 2050, etc., by reducing and getting net zero. No longer a policy of the United States. Promoting construction of clean energy generation, storage, and transmission, i.e., Summit Carbon Solutions Pipeline. Revoked, no longer applicable. So I did that quickly, but you need to be armed with the tools when you are talking to people. And Trump's president now, so people want to claim him for, well, Trump is our mandate that we should drill, baby, drill, and therefore build carbon pipelines. Well, the purpose we were sold on these pipelines was to permanently sequester CO2. Trump has said in his administration, that is not a thing. We want the CO2, we will burn, baby, burn, is what they want to be doing. And so don't let someone bear hug Trump and win an argument against you by saying, well, he's pro-energy, so that must mean CO2. CO2 isn't energy, okay? It's not energy. It may be, part of it could somehow become a very ineffective way of enhanced oil recovery, but it's not energy. It's a leap too far, okay? So don't let Summit wiggle out of who they say they were, which is a 100% sequestration pipeline, number one. If that's who they are, and they weren't liars in every state thus far, then if we listen to Trump, this pipeline should be killed yesterday, okay? So remember, persuasion, rhetoric, how we use the facts to support our arguments. You can use what Trump did on day one and ask, what are we even doing with this pipeline? Okay, thanks, Shelli.
Thank you, Brian. Those are good points. Hopefully that will be available in tomorrow as well. Are you making those available, that statement, those documents?
I will.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I think that the PHMSA, I think those were the questions that I had written down. Anything else, Emma, Tom, Mark? Well, I want to thank everybody for attending. I want to thank Mr. Jorde, Emma, Tom, and Mark for running the show here in the background. Thank you everybody for attending. I'll be sending out the email with the link and all the things that you've seen tonight, and pass it to whoever you need to pass it to who could not attend that you know wanted to attend. And please keep your voices heard. It's not over, but we're gonna try to make sure this doesn't happen. That's our whole goal. That's my whole goal. I just moved back to Nebraska, so you'll be seeing more of me around the state. So Tom and I are going to do a road show probably, so we'll see you sometime soon. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you, team. Have a good evening.